Dawn broke over a quiet 20-acre property north of Wichita in late spring of 2003, its tranquility shattered by the terrified cry of an 11-year-old girl. Sarah McGrath raced toward the swimming pool where her family friend, Patricia Trish Hughes, Sarah's mother's best friend and a gentle second mother to the children, had slipped and vanished beneath the water's surface. When Sarah jumped in to help, all she saw was a splash and then the panicked body of Lou Castro gasping on the pool's edge. Lou Castro, the mysterious patriarch of the Angel's Landing compound. He claimed Trish's death was a tragic accident, but Sarah would never forget what she saw. A wet Castro emerging from the pool moments after Trish drowned. This horrifying incident would later be recognized as the first of 6 suspicious deaths tied to the Angel's Landing commune. Its aftermath launched a decade-long investigation that would unmask Castro as Daniel Perez, a con man who had duped families into a cult of murder, fraud, and SA in the name of a centuries-old angel. So today we are talking all about Angel's Landing. So sit back, relax, and take a deep breath. It's time to let the fresh air in. Hello, everyone. Welcome back, or welcome if you're new. My name is Erin, and I am fascinated by all things cult, true crime, and unique spiritual practices. So if you're into this sort of thing, please consider subscribing. I would absolutely love to have you here. I also want to say thank you for all the birthday wishes. My birthday was on Thursday, and we're having a little party tonight. We're doing a little Y2K celebration, which apparently people don't know what that means, but I'm aging myself here. But it was like my middle school era into high school era, and it's just the best era of music. So we're going to be dancing. I'm going to be dressed up as Britney Spears. It's going to be a whole thing. It's going to be great. So I just want to say thank you guys for your wonderful birthday wishes this past week. Now, when I was looking into what I wanted to cover this weekend, this cult absolutely made my jaw drop, and I had never heard of it. And being from Colorado, where I grew up, and knowing that, obviously Kansas is like the next state over, I'm like, how did I never hear about this? So we're just going to go ahead and start from the beginning. Because Angel's Landing was a carefully constructed illusion. To the outside world, it was an innocent communal household. But to its members, it was a godly family guided by a mystical leader. But beneath that veneer of family values lay a tyrannical regime of fear, exploitation, and greed. As one former child victim later testified at Perez's sentencing, quote, "I was 10 when my childhood was over. While other 10-year-olds were riding bikes or playing with dolls, I was lying naked in a bed, waiting for it to be over," unquote. Now, if that's not enough of a trigger warning into the absolute atrocities that this guy did on these children, just take heed, please. Just be careful with this one. There is a lot of child SA. I mean, these people experienced years of psychological manipulation, lullabies of angelic promises, brutal SA disguised as spiritual healing, and a pattern of deadly accidents in which life insurance payouts lined the pockets of Angel's Landing's leader. Few details are known about the leader, Lou Castro, or Daniel Perez's life, especially his early life, and he took a lot of pains to hide his true identity. By the late 1990s, he was already a drifter with a sketchy history. Court records reveal that Perez spent much of the 1990s in Texas, where he struck up a relationship with a woman named Patricia, later Trish Hughes, and of course, because he's a cult leader, he had a relationship with another woman named Marilyn. In Texas, he was accused of S.A.ing Marilyn's 14-year-old daughter, Michelle, on multiple occasions. He would later tell authorities that he pled guilty to those charges, but claimed that he was abducted and left for dead by 4 men in uniform on the way to sentencing. So authorities never found any evidence for Perez's dramatic stories. So obviously we can maybe come to the conclusion that he made it up to try to dodge the charges. But then somehow, suddenly, he vanished to Mexico and then would reappear in Kansas years later under his brand new persona. By 2001, he had reinvented himself in Wichita, Kansas under the name Lou Castro. He came to town as a charismatic stranger with a mysterious past and no apparent work history. Oxygen True Crime reports that investigators found no record of Castro's existence prior to his arrival in Wichita. No employment files, no official documents, making him virtually invisible to the authorities. In reality, he was an experienced con man who would later confess to fabricating a lot of his story. Perez told courthouse reporters that he was a seer who had suffered memory loss after a beating, and he offered a bunch of various explanations for all of his aliases and travels, of course. In one telling, he claimed to have been deported from Texas to Mexico in 1996, where he was held by corrupt officials until he miraculously escaped. He even said he was a U.S. citizen despite being deported. But the factual details of Perez's pre-Kansas life remain clouded. We just really don't know who he was or what he did. But what is clear is that by the spring of 2001, Lou Castro was in Kansas with a single goal: to build a devoted following on which he could prey. The only clues to Castro's true identity would surface much later. In 2017, the Kansas Supreme Court described how Perez's past had caught up with him. In 1995, he had lived with the very women whose families he would later ensnare in Kansas. Perez's wife, Patricia Hughes, turned out to be the same Trish from Texas. Texas authorities had charged Perez with statutory R-word of Marilyn's daughter, Michelle, and he asserted that he was beaten and left for dead instead of being sentenced. So whether out of delusion or calculation, Perez invented this elaborate story to explain away his crimes. But even as a child, some began to sense the truth. Sarah McGrath's mother, Jennifer Hudson, a Wichita real estate agent, recalled that Perez at first appeared very innocent and overly caring. When Jennifer met him in 2001, she kept a journal insisting that she had to protect this gentle-sounding man. She ultimately gave up her home and moved her family to follow Lou Castro, convinced that he was a benign prophet. Angel's Landing didn't just emerge overnight, though. It was the product of Perez's years-long courtship of vulnerable people. The first followers of Lou Castro were ordinary families, drawn in by a mix of kinship, charisma, and promises of healing. Perez's initial inner circle included Patricia Trish Hughes and her husband Brian, with their baby daughter Nicole, and a friend known as KL. Trish and Brian were originally from Texas and had followed Perez to Kansas, trusting his claims of spiritual power. In the summer of 2001, this group even moved briefly to Missouri and bought a house in KL's name, and then sold it 3 months later so that they could return to Wichita. Sounds like this guy really has a vision for what he's supposed to be, considering he's a benign, almighty knower sent from God, or whatever he claims to be. Now, a key turning point came when Lou Castro met that very Wichita realtor, Jennifer Hudson. The Kansas Supreme Court tells us that Jennifer Sarah McGrath's mother sold Perez a house in spring of 2001, and she was just captivated by him. She soon sold her own home and moved in with Perez and the others, bringing her two daughters, 17-year-old Emily and 10-year-old Sarah. By spring of 2002, Perez had orchestrated the construction of three more modest houses all next to each other on a 20-acre rural tract north of Wichita. And this would become Angel's Landing. Perry's commune officially settled in Sedgwick County near Valley Center and Ketchie, and it looked outwardly just like a close-knit little family. The women handled the homes and the cooking, and the men helped build and maintain the property, and then the children did the chores. So basically, what this guy is doing is collecting families from different cities, different states, even, and then bringing them to this commune where he is making them all of these false promises. The Wichita Eagle later reported that the rural compound was just an innocuous seeming home on a 20-acre plot with a swimming pool and multiple parked cars. But from the outset, Lou Castro kept a very tight grip on the household structure. He forced the adults to sign documents in each other's names so that no official records would ever be linked back to him. The homes were all purchased under different members' names. So Perez claimed no ownership to the homes, but he did control all of the decisions within the home. He just needed his followers to be his scapegoats. Now, each family did earn a modest income, so they brought that into the commune. But inexplicably, the commune shared a startling amount of wealth. Neighbors and local police noted that many of the vehicles on the property were luxury models worth over $40,000, far beyond what a small group earning could be from multiple part-time jobs. It just seemed very fishy from the outside. You're all living communally, you're all contributing to the household, and yet you have this fleet of luxury vehicles. It just didn't seem to make sense. So, to outsiders, Angel's Landing looked serene and prosperous, an almost idyllic rural homestead. But internally, Perez was setting those clear rules that everyone had to follow without question. He totally banned personal autonomy. The members pooled all their money, reported all their earnings to Castro, and were discouraged from any outside relationships. Video evidence even showed that the car buying was done under one person's name. So if you went to work and you're a part of this commune and you want to buy a vehicle, guess who decides what vehicle you're getting? And it is going to be in one person's name, but not Perez's, because heaven forbid he's actually legally tied to anything. Marriages and romantic relationships were subservient to Castro's desires. Under one of many coercive regulations, Perez insisted that unmarried daughters eventually had to share his bed. In one trial testimony, when young Emily, who was only 10 years old, was moved into his bedroom, he justified it by claiming that he needed a pure young person, or a virgin, to share his bed so that his seer powers could sustain him. But in truth, this was the prelude to years of SA. So you're probably wondering, how did this happen? How did families bring their children to this commune and essentially have their entire life being controlled? Well, the control grew very gradually. Because at first, the group functioned as this one big happy family. Julia Hudson, that young girl Sarah's mother, and also that realtor that took this liking to Lou, told the Eagle later that Lou Castro initially seemed to care deeply about her family. He performed miracles and told fortunes and predicted deaths and created awe among the cult members. According to Sarah, Castro convinced the commune that he could heal the sick, and he knew when you were going to die. In early 2002, at a group meeting, he even foretold the death of one member, Jennifer Hudson, to try to pressure Emily's older sister, KL, to step up and assume more duties as a wife figure within the commune. In essence, he used religion-like mystique and the promise of closeness to him to create dependency. I mean, he could tell your future. So if you were to leave, he would probably threaten you with, if you leave, I see that it will be disastrous for you and your family, and you'll all die, and I can see exactly how it's going to happen. So at first, he would reel you in with his love bombing and then suddenly replace it with fear bonding just within months. One survivor remembered that in the beginning, Angel's Landing was like a huge support system, but it didn't take long for things to turn. As Castro's dominance grew, dissent was crushed by threats. He warned that anyone who talked to the police or tried to leave would meet terrible fate, and even promised death if a cult member showed any signs of disloyalty. Over the years, he told followers that failing to find pure young girls for him to bed would literally kill him. Yeah, he said that if he couldn't practice his gross desires on virgin little girls, he would die. So they needed to recruit them for him. This was obviously a manufactured existential threat to his carefully crafted identity as a supernatural seer. Oh, I'll lose my powers if I don't, be a PDF file. Like, give me a break. And this is one of those things where I always have so much empathy for people who get sucked into cults, but this feels like at some point a red flag just just has to go off. Like, if someone is publicly stating in your group that they need you to find young girls who are virgins, and he's obviously a man, like, he's obviously an older man, I would hope that at some point you're like, this isn't appropriate. It just makes me sick to think about these poor children whose parents allowed stuff like this to happen, who knew what was going on with them. And it was through these manipulations that he would isolate the members psychologically and made them all more reliant on him to explain their misfortune or offer salvation. Life at Angel's Landing was highly regimented and centered around Castro's decrees. Officially, they believed that they were under the care of a 1,000-year-old angel. Castro claimed that he was the angel and said that he had been inhabited by the angel and other angels too, like Arthur and Amber. He just made up all these angels that were embodying him. But what I'm guessing happened is he forgot the name of the angel he claimed the first time, and then was like, "Oh shoot, Amber's here too. Amber and Arthur, they come and go as they please, They're just all these angels are talking to me. The angels love me." Don't think so. You are taking advantage of young girls. He also taught that the commune was chosen. He would interpret these basic routine events as divine signs. It's the classic, there's never a coincidence. Everything is a sign. And then he would insist that the group live under whatever special covenant he invented because of that coincidence. Mornings always began with chores. You would feed the livestock, tend the gardens, or perform construction on the expanding compound, all under Castro's watchful eye. The adults in the commune believed all income and resources belonged to the family. They paid their bills from a single communal bank account, so very few outside transactions were visible. And ironically, the bank account nearly always ran low every few years, just before another death. But I don't want to give anything away. But I'm sure if you watch a lot of true crime or you've watched my channel for a while, the gears are probably turning as to how somehow this cult was so rich. Now, personal relationships at Angel's Landing were forcibly remolded. Romance and parenthood existed only with Castro's sanction. If a member's family grew too large, they were told to give away children or wives to other members. And indeed, investigators later uncovered that Castro arranged at least one underage marriage and passed at least one baby from one cult father to another. What? Young girls were often stripped of their normal childhood. As one survivor later described, while other girls her age were planning parties or learning to drive, she was planning for her own death every day due to Castro's essay and intimidation. Under Castro, education of the outside world was totally discouraged. Critical thinking or questioning his authority was considered dangerous. So, in lieu of a conventional religion, Angel's Landing had its own twisted theology. Of course, Castro fashioned himself as the divine messenger. He preached that he could see the future and even speak to the dead. He told horror stories to scare the members, and he insisted that refusing his demands might draw the attention of evil spirits or enemies who were lurking to destroy the commune. He also spun this dark prophecy around the commune's misfortunes. For example, he planned these monthly ceremonies in which willing believers would symbolically die and be reborn into his service. Obviously, planting the seed that if you die for a cause, then your death is like holy or important. And these pseudo trials were all likely intended to test followers' loyalty. So when accidents would occur, Castro reassured members with his prophecy. In 2003, he told the commune that Patricia Hughes already knew that she would die and would come back from the dead. Yeah. I think that if you're in one group and people keep on dying and the leader is like, I predicted the death and was correct, it might be a sign that he's, I don't know, a murderer. And he promised that if you departed, you would return. So this kind of helped to rationalize the tragedies rather than arouse that suspicion that you and I are probably like, duh, hello. Now, economically, the group appeared to survive on the followers' wages. But in reality, money and insurance were an integral part of the belief system. Perez taught followers that financial miracles were only possible through faith in him. He insisted on signing them up for large life insurance policies, credit arrangements, and loans with falsified personal information. For example, he orchestrated the purchase of dozens of vehicles at a local car lot. And during his trial, it emerged that the commune had bought about 35 cars in 4 years, often listing Castro or other cult adults as co-signers without ever intending to repay on their lease. To his followers, this seemed like faith that the commune would always be provided for. But it also sets the stage for the cult's greatest secret. Each accidental death of a member padded the commune's treasury. So obviously, fear was the glue that held everything together. Children who grew up under Castro were told that if they ever told anyone about the cult or the angels would kill them. One survivor quietly told investigators later that she was too scared to come forward, even after Castro's arrest, because he had explicitly warned them that the outside world was dangerous and could harm anyone who betrayed Angel's Landing. In truth, Castro had turned the arcane into a cage. Those who stayed believed he was protecting them from a world that would destroy them. And those who doubted were too terrified to leave. As another longtime member summed up in court, the commune had functioned as Castro's toxic family and money grab. So, over 7 years, Angel's Landing produced a bewildering number of accidents. Investigators eventually counted 6 deaths between 2001 and 2008 among people connected to Lou Castro's commune, all dying under unusual situations. They were all mishaps, and they all coincided with years of dwindling funds. Critically, every victim had carried a hefty life insurance policy, which was cashed out by other cult members after the death. The pattern, it was no accident. As Sedgwick County Detective Ron Goodwin observed, around every 2.5 years, bank account balances would get low. And then someone would die. Law enforcement now believes that Perez targeted these deaths to finance his lifestyle and maintain control. The first major death was in May 2001, even before the group settled in Angel's Landing's property. 30-year-old Mona Griffith, her 12-year-old daughter, and her boyfriend all died in a private plane crash near Norris, South Dakota. They were flying to visit the commune when the crash occurred. Mona's family carried large insurance policies, and her death alone brought about a very significant payout. The cult, however, dismissed this as a catastrophic incident, a tragic accident. The second and most pivotal death happened in June 2003 on the compound. This was the death that we detailed in the beginning of the video. Trish Hughes, just 26 years old, had become a maternal figure to Sarah McGrath and had sold Castro his very first house. And she died by drowning in the pool. Lou Castro reported that Trish had slipped underwater while playing with her grandchildren. Her death was initially ruled accidental, and Castro milked the event as a spiritual matter. He told the group that Trish knew she was going to die, and indeed assured everyone that they didn't need to worry. She was going to come back from the dead. And friendly reminder, this is his first follower. He did not care about any of the people that he recruited. Now, in reality, investigators later deduced that Castro likely murdered Trish in cold blood to trigger an insurance windfall. Her $1 million insurance policy was quickly paid out and, of course, shared among the commune. Now, the third death occurred in March 2006. Brian Hughes, Trish's husband, died in a bizarre work accident. He was at his auto shop when a hydraulic jack apparently slipped and crushed him to death under a car. Family members said that Brian had been despondent since Trish's death, and he'd become a frequent confidant of Castro. One survivor later recalled Castro ominously telling Brian, "One day, you'll get your chance to go to the other side." And yet again, Brian had a life insurance policy, and his death seemed too perfectly timed. With Julia and her daughter's little savings nearly gone, the insurance money kept the commune afloat for 2 more years. Now, the fourth death was in September 2008. Jennifer Hudson died in a head-on collision with a dump truck on a highway. Investigators called it a freak accident, but the timing raised some eyebrows. Jennifer was, in Castro's own words, like a second mother to Sarah and had been sickly for a few years. But she also had $500,000 in life insurance. Her death moved Sarah's 21-year-old brother, Daniel, who by then was Sarah's fiancé, to act. Daniel was grieving, but also very suspicious, and realized how many cult members' lives were cut short. In late 2008, worried that he and Sarah might be next, he decided he was going to contact the FBI and anonymously report all of his findings at Angel's Landing. Now, 2 more names appear in the record of Angel's Landing casualties, making 6 total individuals. They are the 3 victims of the 2001 plane crash. So that's 6 total lives lost, who all had sizable insurance policies, who all died while trying to get involved in the cult or after being involved in the cult. They all carried these massive insurance policies, they all died in implausible accidents, and they all brought in a lot of money into the cult's coffers. As prosecutor Mark Bennett later argued at Perez's hearings, there was no Angel's Landing business. There was just a pool of money that was essentially proceeds from people dying. That's what Perez was living off of. Bennett noted that every time the commune's bank accounts run low, suddenly there would be a death in the commune. I mean, Castro's motive was very clear. He would just cash in on the random accidents to fund his lavish lifestyle and ensure the group depended on him because, oh, I miraculously can conjure all of this money whenever we need it, and you guys just bring me young girls to violate. What? Now, police had discovered that Perez had personally orchestrated each insurance payout. He directed members to claim beneficiaries and to lie on those applications. Investigators found several forged documents on file and identical handwriting on multiple insurance forms. For example, at trial, it was revealed that Perez never actually signed any car or insurance paperwork himself. He had followers co sign under his name, and then he pocketed the proceeds when they died. The insurance companies eventually became very suspicious, but not before Perez had collected over $1 million for Trish alone, plus hundreds of thousands of more from Brian and Jennifer's policies. In all, authorities tally 6 strange fatalities tied to Angel's Landing. In court documents and news reports, their names and causes became infamous. We have that plane crash in 2001, killing 3. Then we have the 2003 drowning of Patricia Hughes. And then we have the 2006 case of Brian Hughes being crushed by a car in a freak accident. And finally, we have 2008's tragic head-on collision with when Jennifer Hudson died. But despite investigators' suspicions, all of these tragedies were initially treated as isolated incidents. Perez repeatedly assured followers that they were predestined events or that the victims, they would come back. Don't worry about it, y'all. Only years later, when a survivor finally spoke up, did the cover of normalcy fully crumble. 2 brave survivors ultimately blew the case wide open. One was Sarah McGrath, the young daughter of the real estate agent Jennifer Hudson, and the other was Daniel McGrath, Sarah's childhood friend and later fiance. And they both basically grew up in the cult. Their accounts, supported by Detective Goodwin's diligent work, provided the inside and outside perspectives needed to crack this case. Now, Sarah McGrath was just 17 when the Angel's Landing nightmare really began to unravel. She recounted years later how, from the moment her family moved in, something just felt off. She said that he was very charismatic and quite the talker, and remembered the early days when Perez appeared to be genuinely caring towards her mother. And at first, Sarah described the commune as this big support system, but it didn't take long for Castro's true nature to emerge. Sarah's first red flag came in 2001 when she overheard Castro boasting about having foreseen Trisha's death, something that nobody would have ever known. And don't forget that Sarah kind of saw him allegedly drown Trish. She was only 11 years old when that happened. And even worse, Sarah became one of Castro's personal targets. By 2002, Perez began routinely R-wording Sarah under the guise of fixing her purity. He would tell her that this would cleanse her and fix her. What? What? For 7 years, he brutally abused Sarah dozens of times, pushing her to the brink of despair. Sarah described it as a relentless nightmare. She said, quote, "There was nothing I could do. I remember saying, 'Am I fixed now?' Unquote. She was trapped, too terrified to tell anyone or even to resist. Even after reaching adulthood, she kept silent, worrying about what Castro might do if she did speak up. When her mother died in 2008, Sarah's protective world crumbled. The mother who had brought her into the commune was gone, and Castro proclaimed this death as predicted. Sarah ended up falling in love with Daniel, a young farm boy she grew up with and had met at Angel's Landing. And Daniel listened when Sarah, 23 years old now, hinted at the horror. And he later told the Wichita Eagle, quote, "You can survive a traumatic event. Life can be good after a storm," unquote. And he urged Sarah to tell him everything. And Sarah finally got to confide the truth. Her R word, the lies about the accidents, and the cult practices. And he was shocked. After Jennifer's death, Daniel realized this just isn't right. Now, Daniel McGrath was a quiet farm boy who was boyfriend to Sarah. By 2010, he escaped the commune and moved north to Nebraska with Sarah and sensed there was something sinister going on. But unlike Sarah, Daniel had not lived under Castro, but he knew enough to worry. So he emailed the FBI in 2010, describing Castro's cult like commune and the strange deaths that plagued it. The FBI passed the tip to Sedgwick County detectives. Now, meanwhile, Detective Ron Goodwin had noticed anomalies since 2003. After Patricia Hughes' death, Goodwin kept an eye on the case. First, because she was related to cult members he already suspected. So when Brian died in 2006, Goodwin dug deeper. He quietly tracked Lou Castro's movements for years, building a file of no apparent job but lots of money. As he later told media, quote, Perez was now known for two things: money no one could explain and the death of Patricia Hughes, unquote. Over time, Goodwin uncovered the rhythm: low bank balances, then a death, then a payout. He often told journalists that this was the most bizarre case of his entire career. Detective Goodwin, along with federal agents, sifted through every scrap of evidence: life insurance forms, property records, witness interviews. He even followed Lou Castro to Nashville to try to confirm his identity. But they still had no arrestable charges. Not until Sarah's confession came. Daniel's email in 2010 gave investigators the leverage they needed. Goodwin coordinated with the FBI and Kansas Bureau of Investigation to track Perez across state lines. By April 21st, 2010, they had located his next safe house in Tennessee, where he had already collected another $500,000 life insurance policy on yet another family member. Perez was quietly arrested that very day. Now, after his arrest, Sarah and Emily, her younger sister, agreed to do multiple interviews. They revealed everything they could, from the details of every suspicious accident to the SA, all the way to the charade at the community bank. In lengthy interviews, Sarah was forced to relive years of horror. And meanwhile, Goodwin and prosecutors pored over the cult's finances and found forged insurance documents. Even during the trial, Perez showed little remorse for what he did and gave a bunch of various stories, but by this point, thanks to Goodwin and the whistleblowers being so vulnerable and retelling the story of the jury luckily was able to get the entire picture. Now, in court, Sedgwick County District Attorney Mark Bennett left no doubt about Perez's motives: money and sex. Bennett bluntly told jurors that Angel's Landing had no legitimate business, only proceeds from its members dying. He explained how Perez lived off the pool of insurance money and doled it out at will. Bennett also pointed out to the judge that without the false insurance applications and death benefits, members could never have afforded their lavish purchases. In one chilling courtroom memory, Bennett recounted a survivor's words. Her childhood was stolen, and she had seen the buildings and beds all too well. She was just fighting to survive every single day. And Detective Goodwin testified on key details as well. He described how in 2003, the pool death of Patricia Hughes had turned from an accident into a murder case only after a frightened child spoke up. The crucial witness was an anonymous girl from the commune who told investigators that she was 11 when Perez forced her to lie and say Trish had accidentally fallen. She said she'd actually heard a splash and a scream from the pool and then saw Perez wet and out of breath. And that's a direct quote. What do we think she really saw? Probably the aftermath of him literally drowning Trish. Goodwin and others portrayed a meticulous accumulation of evidence: cell phone records, witness memories, fragments of paper linking Castro to those policies. Prosecutors also needed to bring the cult's inner dynamics to light. Multiple women, Emily, Sarah's sister, and the two teenage Hudson girls, testified about R-word abuse and the bizarre doctrines that Perez enforced. The defense tried to paint them as unreliable or suggest that they could have left anytime, which, I hate that argument when it comes to cults, because it's undue influence. They're being coerced. They don't have any real choice. But luckily, the jury saw a clear picture of an isolated, terrified family kept in line by promises of angels and threats of literal murder. The judicial process was so long and complex. But luckily, Perez was formally charged in 2012 with 28 crimes, including first-degree murder, R-word, sexual exploitation of a child, aggravated, and multiple counts of fraud and lying on insurance and credit forms. The case drew local and national media attention, and ultimately, Perez went to trial in early 2015, which is just like, oh my gosh, it takes so long. Like, that was only 10 years ago, and he'd been committing crimes like his entire life. And the evidence presented at trial was staggering. There were multiple witnesses, including Sarah McGrath, who gave tearful testimony about the years of essay and daily fear. Her sister Emily also testified about their mother's car accident and other culty experiences. Another cult member, who was only identified as a minor, broke down describing the pool drowning. Detective Goodwin and FBI agents described the investigation process and included how Sarah's coded message at the pool was finally decoded. They also showed a lot of physical evidence, those insurance documents that showed Castro's fingerprints, or lack thereof, text messages, and notes proving that Castro lied to insurers. Video recordings of Castro's home showed an 8-year-old girl undressing, which was used as evidence for the sexual exploitation charge. The prosecution also displayed bank statements and insurance checks linking millions of dollars to the commune after each death. They showed that after Patricia's death alone, more than $1 million flowed into the group accounts. They traced car loan applications with altered documents on file. There was also that investigator testimony of Goodwin recounting tailing Castro for years, sifting through his trash, and picking him up on passports. Another detective explained how Castro had used multiple aliases and told locals that he was an angel, both to ward off scrutiny and to try to impress his followers. Now, the defense, of course, tried to undermine all the claims by pointing out that the women had not been physically restrained and they could have left if they were unhappy. But luckily, the prosecution pointed out that Castro's threats and survivors' fear was the real explanation for their silence. In opening statements, Prosecutor Bennett framed the case bluntly. This case is about a 15-year reign of terror, he told the jury. But the defense offered an alternate narrative. Castro is innocent, and the deaths were just coincidences. But it was not a close fight. On February 17th, 2015, after 5 days of deliberation, but like really, you needed 5 days, the jury returned guilty verdicts on all 28 counts. Perez was 55 by this time and was found guilty of first-degree murder for the 2003 death of Patricia Hughes, 8 counts of R-word, 8 counts of making false statements regarding insurance and loans, 3 counts of aggravated sodomy, and the sexual exploitation of a child, among several other charges. The special judges allowed survivors to speak during sentencing in March 2015. And on March 24th, 2015, District Judge Joseph Brybieska handed down sentences totaling over 80 years. 2 life sentences were mandatory: first-degree murder and the sexual exploitation of an 8-year-old, which carried life without parole for 25 years. On the remaining counts, Perez received 406 months, nearly 34 years. All sentences were made consecutive, so in effect, Perez will spend the rest of his life behind bars. He won't even be eligible for parole until he is well over 100. Now in court, he sat in an orange jumpsuit and refused to utter a word as the judge spoke. At sentencing, one of the women, who had been victimized from age 10 to 23, summed up the enormity of the crimes. She told the judge, quote, "This isn't just about what he's done to so many lives. It's about preventing him from doing it again." Now, of course, Perez immediately promised to appeal. In 2017, the Kansas Supreme Court heard his appeal. He had raised technical objections about trial procedures and instructions. The Supreme Court's written opinion unanimously affirmed all convictions, and the judge noted that there was no reversible error. And Perez's story to the court was once again fantastical. He claimed his identity confusion was due to brainwashing and violence in Mexico. So that's why you had to R-word a bunch of young girls? Doesn't really make sense. But luckily, the court saw right through his lies. And finally, Perez's long trail of deceit and violence was over. After the verdict, investigators and survivors agreed. Truth had triumphed, and Perez was now just a jailhouse inmate. Detective Goodwin, who had spent years on the case, allowed himself to acknowledge the surreal nature of what he'd uncovered. He said it's the most bizarre story he's ever heard, but probably the most amazing feeling in his career to see justice done. The victims and their families found some closure. As Sedgwick County DA Mark Bennett remarked after sentencing, the victims in this case and their families were pleased with the result. The Angel's Landing saga has since become the subject of several true crime documentaries and podcasts. Survivors like Sarah McGrath have spoken publicly about life after escape. Sarah says she feels lucky to have built a normal life. She's married and has children, and tries to help others understand how someone so evil could go unnoticed for so long. In interviews, she has repeatedly warned that you can move on and life can be good after a storm, just like her husband said it would. This is sadly a classic tale of a cult leader being exploitative. But I don't know if I've ever heard of a cult leader being this exploitative. I mean, he portrayed himself as a divine savior. We've seen this before. Isolated members, controlled relationships, demanded money. It all fits a classic cult leader profile. But this particular exploitation, this cult scheme, was so uniquely sinister. He combined tactics that a cold-blooded murder for hire profit scheme and then combined it with being a spiritual leader. As one analysis put it, he was a, quote, millionaire murderer who donned angelic robes to hide his crimes. It's a reminder that these cults, they operate in plain sight. And believers can be ensnared not only by these exotic beliefs, but by anyone really wielding charisma and authorities. The citizens of Wichita knew this case well. It shook the community that such darkness had lurked beneath a rural landscape. But in the end, it took survivors' courage and diligent police work to expose the truth. And for them, I am so grateful, and I really, really hope they are taking care of themselves. I mean, this is kind of an ongoing lesson in vigilance. The trappings of faith and family can sometimes be masks for monsters. So, what do you think about this story? I feel like it's hard to wrap your brain around. It's kind of confusing at the beginning, and then once you get into it, you're just like, absolutely not. This can't be. It just doesn't even feel real. It's utterly heartbreaking that there are so many groups like this. Like, sometimes I'm like, are there any new cults I can really like cover? I feel like I've done all the classics. I feel like I've covered the ones that have been more new, like Twin Flames Universe. And then there are just more and more and more, and they get more and more insidious. It's so concerning that it keeps happening. And I just want to keep speaking out about it and educating people. And please, share your thoughts, share your own commentary down below. I'm thinking of jumping back into doing some more like reacting and debunking some spiritual influencers, or just, a lot of these more recent modern day cult leaders put a lot of stuff out online. So I'm thinking about, reacting to some of those videos in a video every week. So let me know if you'd be interested in that down below. And otherwise, guys, have such a fun and safe weekend. I can't believe it's like we're almost halfway through the year. It's June tomorrow. Like, what? So let me know what you want to see throughout the rest of the year. And as always, thank you for your support. Y'all, please stay safe out there, ask questions, and always stay skeptical. I'll see you in my next video soon.